Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I'd like to talk to you a little bit about minor magic and enhancing spellcasters just a little bit in the game. One of the problems or issues that people have had with D&D, especially older D&D, is the idea that, especially lower level casters, once they've cast their few spells, they're done with their magic and they're no longer really magical. They don't have this magical vibe. And they only have maybe a few spells to cast, so for most of the game, they don't really feel all that magical. Now, I'm not in the camp that believes that, like, say, a low-level magic user is useless unless they're casting spells, and once they've cast these spells, they're really no good, because, of course, you can do lots of other stuff in the game. In the Lamentations of the Flame Princess game that I'm playing in, and games that I've DM'd, most of the time, people aren't engaged in combat or actually making die rolls. We're interacting with people. We're, trying to become bigwigs in the world. We're doing a lot of interacting. And we're just searching around looking for stuff and just plain old adventuring. And so it's not always based on the spells that we have. But I get the idea that there's something missing in the game in terms of how the wizard especially feels. Because let's face it, before any of us played D&D or Lamentations or any other role-playing games, we read stories. And we got an idea. This is what a wizard is like. We read about Merlin. We read about Gandalf. We read about any number of other guys. And you're like, oh, this is what a wizard does. And not only do they have these knockdown, end of the world type spells that make a big difference, but they have lots of little minor tricks and magics they can do. And some of these are useful, some of these are comical, some of these are entertaining, some of these are just, for flavor. And I think the game can use some of that. There's been a few attempts to try to, give magic users and clerics a little bit more magic in terms of minor stuff. First edition did stuff with cantrips, and later second edition put in some orisons, not in the actual core books, but in the Dragon magazine afterwards. And these were zero-level spells. These didn't really affect too much, but they helped a little bit. It was a good try, but there were way too many of them, and it became way too complex, and you really just had too much stuff to remember. And about 9 months ago, I talked about consolidating a bunch of those cantrips and making them more usable. And I used those in the game that I DM'd for a while until, just people had to go do other stuff. And in between, games, I realized, gosh, I wish I had used this concept that I'm going to talk about. And, the DM in our Lamentations game, after several sessions, said, hey, we're going to start using this concept. And so we have been, and it's a lot of fun. The basic idea, and this is a very old concept, I think it goes all the way back to OD&D at some point, is that if a caster has certain spells memorized, he's able to perform at will various minor magics based on that spell, like what it does. So if you have a fire spell memorized, you can maybe make flame, sprout from your finger, and you can light candles or light your pipe, or maybe even hold it under something, long enough to actually light something consequential on fire. It's just going to take a little bit of time. And so you get the basic idea. And this really is only limited by the spells you have memorized and player creativity, which is huge because I think players need to be creative and want to be creative, and also by DM discretion. And as a DM, you have to decide, okay, are you overreaching here? Will this work just automatically? Will this just have a percentage chance? If you want to do X, okay, I'm only going to let it last for a couple seconds, or am I going to let this last for a minute? Or what level of power am I going to let you do this at? And maybe if depending on what the level the caster is, you say, okay, well, you're a 7th level magic user, you can do this little minor thing for a lot longer than you can as a 1st level caster, etc. And of course, it's all up to you. But I was just looking at those spell lists and came up with some little kind of corny and wacky examples, but just an idea. If you're a cleric and you have any of the cure spells memorized, well, maybe you can cure all kinds of little cuts and scratches and minor injuries, and this might make you a hero in the local town, which is kind of cool because you're doing a lot of interacting. If you've got something like cure disease memorized, well, maybe you can't cure the common cold, but maybe you can make somebody feel better for a day or two. Maybe you even can cure the common cold because it's really just a minor disease. It's not going to kill the person, so you're not really blowing cure disease by doing that. You can certainly cure all kinds of boils and rashes and that kind of stuff, and this, once again, can make you kind of a hero, and you're a great guy. Having things like detect evil or protection from evil memorized. How about protection from jerks? For 10 minutes, you can sit down in a tavern and nobody will bug you. How many of you want to be a real-life cleric now? I would. That would be a great thing to have at will. Something like resist fire, resist cold. Well, maybe like in minor inclement weather, you feel comfortable, or the recipient feels comfortable, because it's really not that big of a deal. It's not something that's going to hurt you. any of the divination type spells where you're asking the gods or whatever, is this a good idea, bad idea? You're getting the yes no answers. Well, maybe the cleric's at a poker game and he gets the idea it's time to fold now. If he kind of sort of casts, so to speak, this little thing, and so he cheats a little bit, etc. Magic users have a ton of spells. My magic user in the Lamentations game, he had magic missile memorized. It was time to interrogate somebody, and so he kept zapping them with these little things that didn't really do any damage. But, he was zapping in the eyeballs and some other places, and the guy talked. And, maybe you can be a human bug zapper. Maybe you can kill mice with this thing. Maybe you can actually shoot little missiles at people during combat that do no damage, but might distract them or just cause them some pain for a second, and maybe even give them -1 to hit for, half the round or something. It's, once again, up to DM discretion, how much you want to let these things actually affect the game in terms of, more concrete mechanics. Something like shield, well, maybe you can run from one building to the other and not get wet in a rainstorm, or maybe mosquitoes can't bite you. Something like light, you can cast a little teeny brief light and you can look for something, that sort of thing. Something like charm person, they had all these cantrips in first edition that made you allowed you to make somebody yawn or blink or twitch for a second or turn their head. And with something like charm person, maybe you should be able to do that. You should make people do little inconsequential things, maybe just of some consequence for a second if the person has to close their eyes or whatever. Any of the illusion spells and any kind of illusion spell you have memorized, maybe you should be able to make people think they saw something for a second out of the corner of their eye, or gosh, what was that? And so perhaps if the party thief is trying to sneak past some guards and they're maybe not that attentive anyway, you can cast this sort of thing, make them think they saw something behind them or out of the corner of their eye, and you give the thief a much better chance to get by. That sort of thing. Once again, it's DM discretion, but you should be creative with this kind of stuff. Something like haste. Well, maybe you need to write a note really fast and get the heck out of where you are, and maybe you can cast this, and for 30 seconds you can write a note that would take you 10 minutes to write. Something silly, but it's somewhat useful. Anything like feeble-minded forget. Well, maybe you can make somebody forget something or forget what they were supposed to do for just a couple seconds, and maybe that makes a difference in terms of what you're trying to do. Because remember, a lot of the game's interacting, and it's not actually in a dungeon; it's interacting with people. Something like knock, maybe you can open little teeny things, or some little knots, way over tied. You can just untie that sort of thing. Maybe with sleep you can make people feel tired. Who knows? But you get the basic idea. And so once again, this is really limited just by the spells you have, by player creativity, and by DM discretion. And I think it makes the game a lot more fun. And let's face it, that's what we're here for, is to have fun. And as a DM, I think, a lot of times DMs need to learn to say yes a little bit more. Because some of these things, they're going to make the game fun. They're not going to really affect the outcome that much. And maybe if they affect the outcome a little bit, maybe that's cool. And I think it also really, especially for the Magic user, just kind of recaptures that vibe or that feel that, we had as kids. We're like, this is what a wizard is like. This is what a wizard can do. Isn't that great? And, oh, wow. And so once again, you can have your players, Magic users, be able to do little things like that, pretty much just limited to their imagination. And maybe you can even go a little bit beyond the spells they have memorized and decide, okay, well, if you're an X-level wizard, you should be able to do little teeny things like this. And whether that works for you or not, things like Gandalf blowing little colored smoke rings and, oh, wow, look, isn't this guy cool? He's a magic guy. Stuff like that. So it's just something to think about, and it's a mechanic that I'm going to use because it's dead simple and can really kind of make the game a lot more fun.